First people here were the Southern Sierra Miwok, and they collected acorns and berries, and they hunted and lived in this area possibly as long as 4,000 years ago. So they were here. The Mono Indians also shared the same boundary here. They didn't live here, but they traveled through here. They felt the giant sequoia trees were sacred. They wouldn't mess with them at all. They named them Wawona after what they felt was the guardian spirit of the tree, which is the owl. So they wouldn't mess with them. The Miwok would use some of the red powder from the cone and make an astringent for medicine. So John Muir talks about that as well. John Muir, now I'm going to switch to John Muir and John Nelder. John Nelder is who this grove is named after. It used to be Fresno Grove when we were in Fresno County and it was discovered. But John Nelder moved up here in 1875. He was just a very tired prospector, came up here, loved it, filed a homestead. He finished in 1875 and met John Muir. John Muir talked about, when he met John Nelder, one, they talked about the big trees. John Nelder had a cabin underneath a big tree, our biggest by volume in the grove, about a mile and a half from here. But John Muir and John Nelder hung out for about a week, talking about the trees and the forest. And John Muir talks about the forest back then. The forest back then up here was open. You had big trees and big groves surrounding the area. Now, because of the logging they've done up here, once they clear-cut the area, they didn't thin it back then, they clear-cut it, so they just flattened it. All this area was flat, where all these trees are. So when it becomes flat, then all the little trees grow up really close together, and as they grow larger, then it just makes it dense. And then the ones in the middle get weakened, and then they fall during winter storms, and then you have all this debris on the ground on top of it. So it's not like it used to be. So, but the mills came here in 1888. At least the mill that was here in Nelder Grove, which was over here, and they're the ones that cut most of these trees. They did not cut the sequoias that were larger than 8 feet in diameter, which still seems really big. But they weren't good for the mill. It took too much effort. But once they clear-cut this area and closed out the mill, then the post makers came up, and they're the ones that cut down the giant sequoias. They cut down 277 of these big trees, and we have 100 left. And what I want to show you, and I don't know if you can see that stump right there, or compare it to the log behind us. So there's, can you see the big stump?
Yeah.
And then can you see that log right there?
Yeah.
That log used to be on that stump. When they cut these trees, they take the first 25% of the tree. They'd use that first 25% and make fence posts, grape stake, shingles. They'd leave the rest because when it fell, the further up you were, the more branches there were, the harder it would hit, and it would shatter. You know, it's very brittle. So they'd only take that choice piece of wood there and go to the next tree.
That's why you see the probably 60 feet of it missing right there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the part that they would take.
How old has that been done?
That has been on the ground for 120 years and still solid as a rock, which is why they were sought after for fence posts. Most fence posts would decompose in a few years and you have to dig another post. These probably still in the ground somewhere, and so very desirable.
And
in
if you
that
saw
way.
any other tree that had been felled and on the ground, probably within 10 years they'd be gone.
Right.
This thing is still, that'll probably be still there 1,000 years from now.
Wow.
Because of the tannin inside that protects it.
So it's kind of sad in that way.
And so how many trees are still left?
We have actually 101. One fell in the last few years, so we have 100 left. That does not include Caltech, has 5 trees that surround our Nelder Grove boundary. So if you count those, we have 105 in the area. And then Calvin Crest has 2. So we have 107 giant sequoias in the area that have been.
How many of them have reached maturity in the time they were they've been preserved?
And maturity is 6 feet in width, correct?
And diameter
And
larger, yeah. One of my favorite trees is the bullbuck tree. It's 100 feet around the base circumference. It's very large. It's got a big taper and a beautiful crown. It's 2,700 years old. The grizzly giant in Yosemite National Park is about 3,000. So they're very close in age, and it's hard to get the exact age unless you bore them. But the bullbuck has several stumps that were cut in the area that you can count the rings and get a guess as to the age of that one.
So the one that's cut down behind you, do you know how old that is?
You know, my guess would be 1,500. Maybe a little more, because you got to think too that that tree had maybe 2 feet of bark surrounding it as well. So it was an average of 10 inches to 2 feet, sometimes 2.5, but on average 10 to 2 feet that would be the bark. So even that one, even though it looks big, if you just imagine even more,
Wow.
how much larger that is. But our bullbuck tree, this is a picture of our bullbuck tree. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this picture was taken 120 years ago. And there's a little guy right here. You see him?
Yeah.
So this shows basically the size of the tree. This tree has now been cut, so there's 2 stumps next to the bullbuck tree. And what's spectacular about the bullbuck tree is most of these trees, the older they get, similar to the grizzly giant, they get hit by lightning, they're so tall, or they have burn marks that prevent water to get up, or it just gets so big, you have to get that water up to the top. The bullbuck has a lot of potential these trees really don't die of old age. They'll fall down because the root system is so shallow. They go out about 100 feet, but there's not a taproot, and they only go a couple feet in the ground. So they'll get blown over, the soil will get too wet, something will happen to where it'll fall. This one, however, still looks very secure. The top is still beautiful. Most mature trees, the top third will have the branches and the leaves once they get to this size. This one right now is the top 2/3, and it's still gorgeous. So, and I don't know if you'll make it up here if we have time to go up there
How
today.
long is that hike?
It's a quarter-mile walk.
Oh, that's close.
Yeah, so it's not that far.
Okay.
And it's beautiful. It really, truly is beautiful.
Going back, he was asking about the mature sequoias. I mean, we have 100 mature sequoias here now, but I don't think they grow so slowly. We're not going to, probably in our lifetime, they're not going to be any more. You know what I mean? None of the trees that are, the thousands of trees that are here are going to make into the mature status because they grow. Like I said, this tree here is only 3 or 4 feet in diameter. It's probably 200 years old.
120.
Yeah. And so it's just not, we're not going to ever see maybe another 101, 102 going from a giant sequoia to a mature giant sequoia, because they've been around here so long. I mean, hopefully, you know, our grandkids and other kids will eventually see it to where maybe there'll be 110 or, but it's just, you know, we consider the bullbuck's 2,700 years old. It took a long time.
That's one of our concerns up here. This forest is not healthy. It's extremely dense. There's a lot of debris on the ground. If we had time to take you to the Chimney Tree Trail, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's just windfall, logs. You know, I think we talked about fire earlier. Fire is needed many times for the sequoia to grow because you need the seed to get to the soil. So fire would help in that way. But right now we're so dense, the fire will not only burn too hot on the forest floor, it will go from the treetops since they're so close together, and it will kill most of the trees instead of helping them. So we would love to do something about the health of this forest, and it's pretty scary. So I was going to show you these seeds. The reason why it's hard, a mature tree will grow 60, or will have about 60 million seeds in its lifetime. 91,000. These are the seeds here. 91,000 of these will equal a pound. I don't know if you can get that. But 91,000 will equal a pound. So to be able to get these little seeds to get down to the soil, it's really difficult.
And that's the only way they reproduce is from those seeds.
The coast redwood will reproduce from the roots as well as the seeds from the cones. The giant sequoia does not do that. It's only the seeds. So to get one of these little guys is really tough. That you're competing with sunlight, the density, the thickness of the dust. But you know. The other thing I want to talk about is these cones. What I find interesting about these cones, most trees, the cones, including the coast redwood, they'll stay it for a year or two and then they'll fall. These cones can stay on the tree up to 22 years. And you can also have, just like you can count the rings in a tree to determine the age of the tree, you can also count the rings of the stems to determine the age of the cone. Wow. So it's just another unique attribute.
If you go to a base of the giant sequoia like Big Ed down here, you'll see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those cones on the ground.
So who named these trees? You did?
No,
well, there's some history. My grandparents were volunteer. I'm a volunteer host. My grandparents were volunteer hosts for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Which is what helps keep this campground what it is. It's still free. And they don't have to pay us. So we're able to keep it that way. especially with the funding being so, what it is. There was talk of possibly making this a day use this year and closing the campground because of funding and whatnot. And we were able to keep it open, and I'm very pleased about that because this is just a spectacular place.
Have you seen problems with funding get worse over the years?
Yes.
Or has there always been?
My grandparents struggled a little bit to keep things going, but there's less money for signs. I'm not sure if you had a hard time getting here, figuring out where to go.
And the roads are a little.
Yeah, the roads need some work. This last hill was graded a few weeks ago. Thank goodness. Cars were getting stuck. It's so narrow. So it's pretty bad. We need signage. We need, hopefully, to get crews in here to help get rid of some of this extra debris that we have. And there's just not funding for that. Any trail work is done up here, it's all volunteer through Friends of Nelder Grove or Campfire Boys and Girls, which work with us to help clear the trails. We get help from Boy Scouts, Royal Rangers, church groups. Just a lot of different groups have been helping now the last year or two that we're getting in to help maintain these trails. Forest Service, they just don't have time or funding or staff to do that. So it's basically just getting the paint, the signs, what signs that we have painted. We're getting the paint donated. Our fire pits need a lot of work. They're kind of small, and so Forest Service is working on, I think, getting us some larger fire pits, and then Friends of Nelder Grove will help install them. So,
what about the campground? Do a lot of people know about it? How do people hear about this?
For many years, people considered it a secret. They didn't want to share it. So, lately now, I have a website. I have a Facebook page, word of mouth. I'm getting more people up here writing articles. We're sharing it with others. And my desire is to share it is because really we need a lot of local people up here. Most of our visitors come from out of the California, even. They come from all over the world: Norway, Switzerland. We had former Czech Republic.
Uruguay,
yeah, they're just,
New Zealand.
really, we get a lot of visitors here.
So do you find it strange that there are more, we spoke with a woman at Yosemite yesterday, and she was saying that most of the people come from California, which are local, so that's understandable because there's so many people and it's in their home. Yeah. And then the rest, the visitors that come from outside of the state, 20% are from the United States and 20% are from abroad.
Right.
We just thought it was kind of strange that, people within our country, this is our treasure, this is our environment, our land, our nature, and more people abroad, or at least the same amount of people abroad appreciate and fly overseas to come here when somebody in, Washington or Oregon or wherever can get in a car and drive here.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
It's always been amazing to me, people that don't explore where they live. We'll have people just 10 miles down the road that have never been here. But they'll decide to go on a vacation, they want to get out, so they decide to go to the coast, or they decide to go maybe to Yosemite or Oregon or somewhere else. They go somewhere else. They don't explore their own backyard or share it with others. So for me, getting the website, getting the groups to come up, the more people I get up here, hopefully the more locals I'll get up here to help take care of Nelder Grove. This is a generational thing for us. My grandparents, with being 20 years, they had their friends here as hosts for 6 years. And now we're here. If we weren't here, I'm not sure if we'd have anyone else that'd be willing to stay. We've been living here since the end of May.
Wow. And
we haven't been home. It'll be hard to find the volunteers. If we need to go somewhere, trying to find someone to hang out here at the cabins, maybe to greet people, it's difficult to find people that are willing to do that. So we're trying to build up that volunteer base and trying to get the locals up here. So, but I think it's wonderful that we get people from all over the country, though. We have a map that we highlight where everybody's from, in all the states and the countries, and it's great for our kids, and for the fact that they're willing to come up here. It's pretty rustic. It's not like Yosemite where you got the paved roads, and I think my husband said you can just kind of drive through whatever you want to see. But here you also have to, you have to drive over those bumps, and you have to get out on a trail to see most of our trees. But they are beautiful. You mentioned the names of the trees. My grandfather named some of them. The Forest Service named some of them. The Forest Service honored many people for some of these trees. We have a tree called the Forester. It's 299 feet tall, It's a giant sequoia. And Walter Pune was a retired Forest Service supervisor, I think. And so the Forest Service said, pick a tree. We want to name a tree after you. His last name is Pune, so he didn't want it called the Pune tree. So they called it the Forester, because that's what he was. And he said that way it can honor all foresters.
Wow.
We have the Hawksworth tree, which is 3 miles from here. That's my grandparents' tree. The Forest Service went to my grandparents after 20 years and said, okay, we want to honor you with a tree. So that's...
That was your grandmother's favorite tree.
That was my grandmother's favorite tree.
Used to
She
be called
loved
the
it.
bee tree.
Bees used to live under the bark, and so they called it the bee tree.
Wow.
And my grandpa called it Marge's tree. But, so they're both passed away now, but it's nice to have that. We have the granddad behind it, which was named by Gordon Garrett, which was in the Forest Service as well. He's now 101 years old.
Wow.
But he was having lunch up there with a buddy, and there's a big branch, a big, huge branch that comes out. It's amazing it hasn't fallen from the weight. And he said it, and there were a whole bunch of little sequoias surrounding it. So he called it the granddad and the grandkids. And it's pointing east with its branch. So he said that the granddad is telling the kids about what it was like when he came from the east over here to the west. So we have a chimney tree that has a burned center through the center with a smoke hole, and it's called the chimney because it's kind of what it is.
What about the bullbuck and Big Ed?
Well, I want to talk about the clothespin.
Okay.
The clothespin was hit by lightning, so the top looks like a clothespin. So the bullbuck back in the day when they had the crews up here with the logging and the fence post with the giant sequoias, the boss of the woods was the bullbuck. He was the boss. He was the foreman. So they named this tree the bullbuck because he's boss of the woods. Big Ed is a tree we have down here. It's 150 yards. Ed Zerling was the SoCal Works Center foreman, and he loved the tree. And you used to be able to see it from the lower road here every day. He went to work and left, and he'd say hello to the tree. So the guys knew it was his favorite tree. Somehow the information spread, so they named it Big Ed after Ed Zerling.
Sure.
So, we have lots of trees that have different names. We have one tree that has an undercut in it, and they stopped cutting it. So the bark is starting to grow over, and it has 2 spots above it, and it looks like a face, like it's smiling at you.
Yeah, they don't know what probably an undercut is.
Okay. When they cut down these trees, they would make an undercut, like a wedge, and then they'd get a whip saw, misery whip, the 2-man saw, and then they'd cut, and it would fall where that undercut was. It was the direction it would fall. But they use axes to make that undercut. So they started this undercut to start the process of cutting it, and then stopped. So he's got this smiley face on, looking like, hey, I'm still here.
That's great.
So,
so it doesn't bother the tree at all that there was a chunk of it cut out?
well, it depends on how much they take out. They will, the bark will continue to grow, and like right now, like I was saying, when I was a kid, there was a big gap. Now the bark is going over it. And as long as you don't get to the center of the heartwoods, sometimes it'll be okay. Now, if you lose a lot of the bark insulates the tree. So during the winter, if it's really, really cold and the bark has been stripped, the tree may not make it. So you really need that insulation around it. But that little wedge, it was able to survive that. The chimney tree, the fact that it's still alive is amazing.
You can walk right through it and
Yeah.
look straight up.
You can stand You can stand and walk right through it, look up, see this big, huge smoke hole, and walk out the back. The bark is starting to grow over in spots around.